U.S. Supreme Court is considering whether a ban on bump stocks.
President Biden released his budget today, and now we're learning more about how he plans to pay for his priorities.
Of domestic abuse, you shouldn't have a gun. If you're on social media threatening the lives of people, you shouldn't have a gun.
Now, guys, usual caveats apply. These are just proposals, but they do show us where the White House's priorities are.
Numerous instances, whether intentional or unintentional, of Biden administration officials and anti-gun advocates and even the president himself.
Biden's budget proposal. All right, let's break down what's cooking with President Biden's budget plan for the ATF. Uncle Joe's got this grand idea to beef up the ATF with a hefty chunk of change. We're talking about a cool $2 billion here. That's a 30% boost from what they were working with in the past. Seems like Biden's got some big plans for these guys. Now, this cash infusion isn't just some random act of generosity. Nope, it's all part of a bigger picture. See, the whole Department of Justice is getting a bit of a financial facelift, with a whopping $17.7 billion being thrown into the mix. And a good chunk of that change is earmarked for our friends over at the ATF.
President Biden released his budget today, and now we're learning more about how he plans to pay for his priorities.
President Biden's 2025 budget proposal, including what it allocates for border security.
Now, guys, usual caveats apply. These are just proposals, but they do show us where the White House's priorities are.
Today, President Biden was sharing details of his proposed budget.
So what's the deal with all this moolah? Well, Biden's not just tossing cash around for the fun of it. The idea here is to supercharge the ATF's ability to tackle gun-related crimes head-on. We're talking about investigations, prosecutions, and all that jazz. You know, making sure the bad guys don't get away with waving guns around like they own the place. With this kind of cash injection, the ATF can beef up their teams, invest in better technology, and maybe even upgrade their office coffee machines. Hey, you gotta keep the agents caffeinated when they're out there fighting crime, right? But seriously, this budget proposal is a big deal. It's a sign that Biden's serious about cracking down on gun violence and making our community safer. Whether you're a gun enthusiast or just someone who wants to feel safe walking down the street, having a well-funded ATF on the case can only be a good thing. So let's see if Joe's budget proposal gets the green light. With $2 billion in their pockets, the ATF could be gearing up for some serious action in the fight against gun crime. Focus on gun regulations. All right, buckle up because things are getting serious in the world of gun regulations, especially under the Biden administration. The ATF has kicked things into high gear when it comes to making sure firearms are kept in check. They're not messing around anymore. First off, they've rolled out what they call zero-tolerance policies. Basically, this means they're cracking down hard on any gun dealers who step out of line. No more turning a blind eye to slip-ups or minor infractions. If you're a gun dealer and you're not playing by the rules, you better watch out because the ATF is coming for you. But that's not all. The ATF's got their sights set on ghost guns too. These are basically unregistered firearms that fly under the radar, and the ATF is determined to put a stop to them. They're ramping up their efforts to track down these sneaky weapons and make sure they don't end up in the wrong hands. And then there's the whole deal with private sellers. The ATF's got some big plans in the works to tighten the screws on this front. They're talking about banning private sales of firearms altogether.
Who claims the ATF overstepped its authority when it banned the accessories.
A U.S. district judge temporarily blocked the enforcement of the ban, later overturned by the state circuit court.
Thousands of firearms parts, and ammunition had been stolen from the ATF. So I know what they're doing. I know what they're doing. They're getting robbed on one hand, so you can't keep a hold of the guns you're supposed to have.
Yep, you heard that right. No more backyard transactions or sketchy deals done in the shadows. The ATF wants to make sure every gun sale is above board and properly regulated. But wait, there's more. The ATF isn't stopping there. They've also got their eye on parts kits. These kits might not look like much on their own, but the ATF sees them as potential troublemakers. They're talking about expanding the definition of firearms to include these kits, which means they'd be subject to the same regulations as fully assembled guns. Controversies surrounding ATF actions. Well, it looks like the ATF's not without its fair share of controversies, folks. let's dive into what's been stirring up some heated debates. So first off, we've got whistleblowers within the ATF raising red flags about proposed rules that could be stepping on some toes, particularly those of Second Amendment enthusiasts. These folks are sounding the alarm, saying that these new regulations might be treading a bit too closely on our constitutional rights. And they're not the only ones who are concerned.
Of domestic abuse, you shouldn't have a gun. If you're on social media threatening the lives of people, you shouldn't have a gun.
And they're saying, they have the authority to do that. The gun rights groups that are suing.
The appeals court that was asked to step in and allow the regulations to continue agreed with the district court judge.
They are coming for your guns. They're listing them out in this extensive legislation.
Advocacy groups have also jumped into the fray, criticizing the ATF's actions and warning that they could end up disproportionately impacting law-abiding citizens. After all, nobody wants to see their rights trampled on, right? It's a delicate balance between keeping our communities safe and respecting individual liberties. And some folks are worried that the ATF might be leaning too heavily on the side of regulation. But that's not where the controversy ends. Oh no, we've also got increased license revocations for firearms dealers, stirring up some trouble. And let's not forget about the ATF's crackdown on ghost guns. These efforts have sparked legal challenges left and right, with critics arguing that they're overstepping their bounds and encroaching on our rights. It's a classic case of the age-old debate. How much regulation is too much? On one hand, we want to keep guns out of the wrong hands and prevent senseless violence, but on the other hand, we've got to make sure we're not sacrificing our freedoms in the process. So what's the solution? Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Finding the right balance between gun control and individual liberties is no easy feat. But one thing's for sure, as long as there are passionate voices on both sides of the debate, the controversy surrounding the ATF's actions is sure to keep simmering. Legal challenges. Legal challenges and court rulings, where the rubber meets the road in the world of gun regulations. Let's unpack what's been happening in the courtroom. First up, we've got court rulings coming down hard on certain ATF regulations. Take, for example, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which recently gave the thumbs down to some of the ATF's moves, saying they overstepped their bounds. This decision has thrown a wrench into the works, calling into question the agency's authority to implement sweeping gun control measures. It's a classic case of the judicial branch stepping in to keep the executive branch in check. But wait, it gets even juicier. The Supreme Court has also been getting in on the action, weighing in on cases related to ATF regulations. One notable example? The bump stock ban. This controversial move by the ATF didn't sit well with everyone, and the Supreme Court found themselves in the hot seat, tasked with untangling the legal mess.
The U.S. Supreme Court is considering whether a ban on bump stock.
This is a violation of that federal law. The federal judge that initially ruled in this agreed, saying it's up to Congress.
Members of Congress are also trying to answer what the Attorney General just called the most difficult question in a democracy.
The ban came after the 2017 mass shooting in Las Vegas.
It's a reminder that when it comes to interpreting firearm laws, things can get mighty complicated mighty fast. These legal battles highlight the ongoing struggle to strike the right balance between gun control and individual rights. It's a delicate dance, with both sides arguing their case passionately. And as these cases wind their way through the courts, it's clear that there are no easy answers when it comes to interpreting the Constitution in the context of modern-day firearm regulations. So, what's next? Well, with the involvement of the Supreme Court, the stakes couldn't be higher. Their decisions will shape the landscape of gun regulations for years to come, setting precedents that will ripple through the legal system. One thing's for sure, as long as there are legal challenges and court rulings, the debate over gun control will continue to rage on. It's a high-stakes game with no shortage of players, and the outcome could have far-reaching consequences for us all. Political and legal dynamics. Let's peel back the curtain and take a closer look at the political and legal dynamics swirling around President Biden's push for tighter gun regulations. Biden's not just throwing around cash and regulations willy-nilly. His call for increased funding for the ATF and stricter gun regulations is part of a much bigger conversation happening in the political arena.
Numerous instances, whether intentional or unintentional, of Biden administration officials and anti-gun advocates and even the president himself.
And I think the president has given numerous different times he's talked about this provision.
Do you agree with President Biden that this law's broad immunity means blanket immunity?
Again, as ATF director, what Congress passes is what we deal with.
Gun control has long been a hot-button issue, with passionate voices on both sides of the debate. And in the wake of recent tragedies and calls for action, Biden's making it clear where he stands. But here's where things get really interesting. Legal disputes are heating up too. The ATF's actions are sparking fundamental debates over the balance of power between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government. It's a classic case of checks and balances in action. Who gets to call the shots when it comes to regulating firearms? And how much authority does the executive branch really have? These are the questions at the heart of the legal battles raging in courtrooms across the country. And, make no mistake, the outcome of these legal battles will have far-reaching implications. The future of firearm regulations in the U.S. hangs in the balance, with potential consequences for gun owners, public safety advocates, and everyone in between. Whether you're a staunch defender of the Second Amendment or a vocal advocate for stricter gun laws, these legal showdowns will shape the landscape for years to come. So what's the bottom line? Well, buckle up because we're in for a wild ride. The intersection of politics and law is a tumultuous one, especially when it comes to an issue as divisive as gun control. But one thing's for sure, as long as there are voices clamoring for change and legal battles being fought in the courtroom, the debate over firearm regulations will continue to rage on. It's a high-stakes game with no easy answers, but one thing's for sure, the future of gun control in America is up for grabs. That's all for this video, folks. See you next time.